Hello, welcome back to Press TV's live coverage of the terrorist attacks that have happened in Paris. Well, joining us for the analytical part of this live coverage, we have Ken O'Keefe, former U.S. Marine, who joins us in the studios here in the capital, Tehran, and Rodney Martin, who's a former U.S. congressional staffer, who joins us from L.A., Los Angeles. Thank you, gentlemen. Ken O'Keefe, I'll start with you. This should, I would think, be a warning signal to some of the countries supporting the terrorists in the war in Syria, in particular the U.S., Turkey, and Saudi Arabia.
Yes, well, I hope actually that it's even more of a wake-up call for us to realize that we are ISIS, that the Western governments that are in bed with Saudi Arabia, who is the primary funder of ISIS, along with Qatar and other Gulf states, we not only provide the political cover and military assistance to Saudi Arabia while it slaughters innocent people in Yemen, but we also provide the cover for them to go ahead and do their dirty dealing with these psychopaths who are running around Syria and other parts of the world as well, Iraq. Let us remember that before the United States invaded Iraq, there was no Al-Qaeda in Iraq. Look at it today. Let us also remember that when Gaddafi was in power in Libya, there was very little Al-Qaeda. And in fact, now we look at it, and it's an absolute basket case full of these operatives. And we look to Syria as well as yet another example of where these problems were actually quite under control in terms of Al-Qaeda. In fact, Bashar al-Assad was assisting the United States, this is all on record, in a very meaningful way. In fact, many of the tortures that were being carried out were being done by Bashar al-Assad, or at least his regime, in order to extract information from people that we were supposedly fighting. I believe that it is beyond any doubt for any sensible person to realize that not only is the United States providing the financial cover, military cover, political cover for these terrorists through our proxies, but we've also, in pure technical sense, provided the training for these people in Jordan and Turkey. Another one of our best friends has been shuttling these psychopaths across the country from Turkey into Syria for a long time now. So the idea that the West is actually fighting a war against ISIS is beyond ridiculous. So what we really need to do is start realizing the fact that we are ISIS, and the reason why our corrupt, treasonous governments are carrying out these policies is because they do not represent us. They represent the bankers, and the bankers make a hell of a lot of money off of war. And more importantly, as long as we're all fighting each other, as long as we're all not trusting each other, as long as we're all simply being played as pawns over and over, then they can maintain this tyrannical system of never-ending war. So this is really the wake-up call. What has happened in Paris is us. We are responsible through our corrupt governments for all of these policies, and even if these individuals who carried this out are not directly working for Mossad, CIA, ISIS, Al-Qaeda, all the same thing, even if they did this organically of their own volition, believe me, that is exactly what our so-called governments want. That is what the policy that we've been fostering over and over. And quite frankly, if we're to look at ISIS, ISIS stands for Israeli Secret Intelligence Service. They never attack Israel, and that in itself also tells you a lot about who these individuals are.
Well, some of the events there, Ken O'Keefe, that our guest Rodney Martin talks about in terms of Islamophobia being created again, or more policies to exercise against Muslims, well, maybe this is what the intent is behind these attacks. If there are any hands at play behind the scenes of some of the countries involved in this so-called war on terror.
Well, indeed, that's the case, and it's just more of the same now, isn't it? Now, I'm a non-Muslim, and I am angry at the way Muslims have been portrayed around the world. I have lived in Muslim lands, and I have experienced some of the greatest hospitality and generosity that you will ever experience, and yet Muslims in general are being associated with this monstrosity, this most recent monstrosity known as ISIS, which again I say is Israeli Secret Intelligence Service, and also Al-Qaeda previous to that, Al-Nusra Front. All of these things are intended to smear Islam as a whole, 1.8 billion people on this planet, to associate them with this sort of madness, when in fact it is us in the West that are creating this stuff, funding it, very much protecting it. In fact, America has been providing air cover to these psychopaths in Syria and Iraq largely, and we see that when Russia comes in and actually does something constructive, look how long many of these men are shaving their beards and running off with their heads, tails between their legs. It is really, really, really disgusting that people have been conned into thinking that Muslims have anything to do with this. And let us harken back to the original incident which has caused this madness known as the War on Terror. The so-called 19 hijackers in Osama bin Laden is one of the greatest fairy stories ever created. The idea that this man in a cave in Afghanistan on dialysis was masterminding this incredible operation in the United States with 19 so-called hijackers wielding box cutters Mohammed Atta among them, snorting cocaine and hanging out with strippers in Florida, that these people are responsible for this event in defiance of the greatest military machine in the history of mankind, never mind all of the evidence that's come forward that makes the official version of 9/11 beyond ridiculous. Muslims did not carry out 9/11. In fact, those who blame the Muslims, primarily the Jewish supremacist Zionist-controlled media of America and the government which is controlled by these Jewish supremacist Zionists in America, all of them parrot the same ridiculous, tired old line that Muslims are responsible. And this is an agenda which is intended to create a clash of civilizations. And if we are smart as people, we're going to see the agenda for what it is, and we're going to realize that those who are collaborating in this agenda need to be held to account for literal war crimes and crimes against humanity. And I'm including in that not just the politicians in the military, but those in the media who have perpetuated these lies, because there is no way that they could possibly believe this nonsense. These people have literally sold their soul to the service of the devil.
This piece of breaking news that's at the bottom of the screen, Ken O'Keefe, that states, it's a message from Assad to Hollande. France suffered on Friday the brutality of terrorism that that has plagued Syria for more than 5 years. That's quite telling in terms of what Syria has experienced. Your reaction to that statement?
Yes, it is truly incredible that we listen to anyone, whether it's Francois Hollande or Obama or any of these other puppets, as if anything they says has any merit whatsoever. There is no moral authority at all in the West. When these people get up, they are an embarrassment to all of us who have a functioning brain and a heart. These people are traitors, whether they come from France or whether they come from Britain or America, and everything they say is to be taken as complete and total rubbish. The idea that France and the West is not directly responsible for the mayhem that has been occurring in Syria is again beyond ridiculous. We know for a fact how we've been supposedly funding and supporting the moderate rebels. There is no such thing. Even recently, a U.S. general admitting that there may be 4 or 5 of these people in Syria. The entire policy is intended to create havoc in the Middle East, and it is extremely important that people around the world begin to fully comprehend that these policies that are being carried out in the Middle East are actually not failures. I'm getting sick of hearing so-called experts talking about geopolitics and how America is failing to learn from its mistakes and all of this nonsense. These are not mistakes. These are intentional policies to wreak havoc, to sow the seeds of sectarian hatred. Again, let me cite the fact that before we took Saddam Hussein out in Iraq, there was no Al-Qaeda in Iraq. Also, when we played this game in Libya, there was no such thing as ISIS and all of this madness that's going on in Libya today. Syria, again, while it had its problems, and it certainly had its human rights abuses, most definitely did not have the problem that it has today. Every country that we touch by Western policy, every country that we touch in the Middle East is full of these monsters. Let's look to Iran, the country that we claim to be the biggest threat to everyone, the Israeli Jewish supremacist agenda, which constantly tells us that Iran is the big threat to the world and that it wants to wipe Israel off the map. Let's look at Iran. Let's look how many attacks by Al-Qaeda and ISIS are occurring here. Let's look at how Iran has been fighting MEK, a true terrorist force that has killed over 20,000 people in the last 20 years or so. This nation is fighting terrorism legitimately. It has provided sanctuary to Jews and Christians historically over the millennia. It has not indulged in any war for hundreds of years other than the imposed war in which we forced with our attack dog Saddam Hussein, and yet we are being told that Iran is the threat. Here I sit in Tehran, and I can tell you the threat from ISIS is next to none. And the reason why is because Iran is not a player in this nasty game in which Saudi Arabia, Qatar, other Gulf states, Turkey, Jordan, ourselves, Britain, France, all fund, train, support, and ultimately are responsible for these monsters running around in their latest branded name, ISIS, which I will repeat a third time stands for Israeli Secret Intelligence Service.
We're going to end it there. Thank you so much for that. That's Ken O'Keefe, former U.S. Marine, here in the studios with the statements.